Hi, my name is Sarah Nance, and this is my Module 8 assignment focused on legal issues and teacher evaluation. I wanted to start by summarizing the 3 articles that were made available to us. The first one would be the Every Student Succeeds Act article, and this one gave a brief overview of what this act entails, and basically it ended the federal government's involvement in defining teacher evaluation systems across the nation, and it allows states to redesign and resubmit descriptions of their evaluations to the Department of Education based on values or what their state deems as needed in teacher evaluations. Basically, states now have the autonomy with goal setting and how they conduct their evaluation processes, and some of the measures included in those evaluation processes for teachers can include student growth and performance measures. There are obviously a lot of implications with this, one of them being that every state is different, and I think that can cause a little bit of an issue, especially when we talk about pay for performance and tenure, but also with collective bargaining. The ESSA preserves rights but does not create rights not already established, and that's interesting for collective bargaining. Much of the article focused on the idea of collective bargaining, so I pulled out one piece of evidence to kind of support the general idea about what ESSA does with collective bargaining, and it says that depending on the scope of the state's collective bargaining law, the association at hand may be able to negotiate aspects of the evaluation system, such as the measures to be assessed, observation procedures, and tools or forms associated with the evaluation or accountability system for teachers. Some associations have negotiated a joint evaluation committee to oversee the process, while others include the specifics in the collective bargaining agreement. The next article that I read was the Teacher Evaluation Heads to the Courts, and this article was a brief article talking about the legal side, which again is the focus for this module, about the implementation of new evaluation processes in the states. Many across the nation have taken to the courts, filing lawsuits that challenge aspects of the system in federal and state courts. The kind of categories that these lawsuits fall under were about how the systems were implemented, grading components including student performance measures, unfairness. Some of the court cases talked about not taking into account student demographics in teacher evaluations and if that's legal or not. And then, of course, tenure. If you are above 3 years or below 3 years, what does that mean for evaluation processes? The rest of the article focused on several court cases per state in Florida, Texas, Tennessee, New York, New Mexico, Nevada, and Louisiana. The final article was Teacher Evaluation and Issue Overview, and basically it talked about what was long beheld as a kind of an obscure policy and process. Teacher evaluation has become contentious and popular since the late 2000s when some of these evaluation system overhauls were implemented. My mom was a teacher for 30 years, and she said that in the 80s and 90s, when she was kind of at the height of her career, teacher evaluation was a complete joke. She might have an evaluator come in once or twice a year. They'd offer very generic feedback and not centered on student improvement or student growth, and that was it. So obviously it's become more contentious as teachers are really being held accountable for their own performance and also their students. Some of the factors that are included with why teacher evaluation processes were kind of changed, and a lot of it had to do with new research on teacher effectiveness, wanting teachers to be more effective, revamping state policy on student accountability and teacher accountability, and then just a lot of political pressure to get our students to better places, to be more competitive in the workforce and in the world. What I thought was interesting is that most data shows, according to this article, that teachers are scoring just as highly as they did before. So teachers who were previously rated highly are also scoring just as highly. With evaluation processes being changed, I know that better feedback from evaluators has been definitely a component of it, and better feedback from evaluators should equal better teaching, which should equal student growth. And if that's ultimately the goal, then I don't find that the evaluation process change has been for the worse. To continue with the article, it talked a lot about why these systems were kind of overhauled. And a big key part was that skilled and low-performing teachers based on student test scores were receiving similar evaluations, and obviously that needed to change. There were some incentives like Race to the Top and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Districts and states have added things, however, that create tension. That would be pay for performance, issues with dismissal, and obviously issues with promotions given evaluations. New evaluation systems across the country include multiple data points, observations, student growth, and a variety of other factors. The teacher response is varied. I find that the evaluation process in Colorado is very fair and would not penalize me for certain things, but a lot of teachers remain wary about connecting the systems to teacher pay and tenure, and they adamantly oppose the inclusion of students' standardized test scores in the systems. I can get behind most of that, I believe. And then the next part of the article talked about whether or not teacher evaluation system changes have been working, and results vary, mostly because new systems are still in the process of implementation, or implementing their processes effectively. There's a lot of testing and refinement going on. They're facing challenges with incomplete implementation, and also facing challenges with teachers who want to appeal because they feel like they've been unfairly or counterproductively scored. So in Colorado, we passed Senate Bill 10-191. I work in Cherry Creek School District. That's what CCSD stands for. In 2013, like I said, this bill was passed, and we are a race to the top state. So we are a grantee of that. And basically, our new evaluation requirements include opportunities for reflection, for review, and professional development along with growth. So how it works in Colorado, annual evaluations are conducted for all principals and assistant principals. That is definitely new. But then, of course, teachers and specialized service professionals as well. The evaluations are based on a statewide agreed upon quality standards. There are 5 of them, including instruction, reflection, and classroom management. Those are part of the 5. But then the final quality rating does have to do with student learning outcomes. And so it's not enough to create a teacher being ranked partially effective or ineffective. It would have to be a combination between the observations and the student learning objective to influence a teacher's rating significantly. So like I said, the other half of an educator's annual evaluation is based on the quality standard measuring student growth. Non-probationary status is earned after 3 consecutive years of demonstrated effectiveness, and it is lost after 2 years of receiving less than effective ratings. So for me, I'm observed 4 times a year. These are drop-in evaluations that last anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes, although the one I had on Friday was an hour long, which I didn't mind because he stayed and we had a really great discussion after the lesson, and it was very positive and I loved it. But that's pretty standard, 20 to 40 to I guess 60 minutes, about once a quarter. Or a teacher can request 2 formal observations that last the full 95-minute block at our school. That makes up half of my rating. Non-probationary teachers are also observed 4 times a year, but they're observed in 4 formal, longer evaluations or observations. Feedback for all evaluations is received online within 2 weeks of our observation. Teacher and evaluators meet 3 times a year before the evaluations begin as progress monitoring, and then a post-evaluation or meeting. The other half of my rating, like I said, has been that student learning objective. We set that with our PLT. If the students don't meet those objectives that we set, it's fine. It does not affect my rating at all. The evaluators use that. They basically grade our process, how we came up with the goal, what rubrics we're using, how we're measuring, how often we're measuring, formative assessments, reflection, and remediation and extension. So the process is what is graded, not the actual did the students get there or not. And then the school performance is rated, and that's the other half of the half of that second part. So if those last 2 were not deemed ineffective or partially proficient, it would not be enough to take my overall rating down to partially proficient or ineffective without the similarly ineffective observations. So for recourse in Cherry Creek School District, I was very unclear about this. It is not made available to us easily, but there is an appeals process that teachers can go through if they receive 2 years in a row ratings of partially proficient or ineffective. If they object to the rating within 15 days of receiving it, they have the right to appeal that rating. If the rating is confirmed, however, they will lose their non-probationary status, but they're not fired until 3 years of showing ineffectiveness. So the process is that the teacher submits written or verbal appeal, a panel reviews the information, A panel makes a recommendation, and then the superintendent makes the final decision. The decision is then shared, of course, with all pertinent stakeholders. Probationary teachers cannot appeal this process. As far as kind of why and what teachers have rights to, they have the right to early identification for performance deficiencies well in advance of their second consecutive rating of partially effective or ineffective. And that is something that a teacher could bring a lawsuit about. Teachers also have the right to the provision of targeted and timely opportunities, including resources and training to address those areas of deficiency, and promptly after they receive their first performance evaluation of partially effective or ineffective. And that can factor into the appeals process as well. So I tried to find some court cases in Colorado, but there really hasn't been anything substantial in the past 5 years. So I went back to the first article that was shared with us and found one from New York, Ahern versus King, filed in 2014, in which Kevin Ahern, the president of the Syracuse Teachers Association, filed a lawsuit against the state of New York, specifically the commissioner of the Department of Education of New York, John King, and he contended that student growth formula in the teacher evaluations in New York did not account properly for student poverty, and that economically disadvantaged students may influence the growth model in relation to teacher evaluations. This is a huge topic. I think this is a really interesting case because at what level do we factor in student demographics into evaluations, or can we or should we? They also allege that the state imposed regulations about this without public comment. So the defendants, the state of New York, basically argued that the growth model used by the state did acknowledge the need for controlling students' demographic variables to moderate bias. And they said if that student's family was participating in economic assistance programs, that the student would be flagged, and his or her growth would have been compared similarly to other flagged students to not affect a teacher's evaluation. If it was unknown, the student was treated as if they were not economically disadvantaged. So, however, nothing in the document was explicated or really detailed or confirmed whether the model output were indeed biased or if that could affect a teacher's rating. So they tried to dismiss the case on a basis of statute of limitations. However, because it wasn't determined at an appropriate amount of time, the statute of limitations clock never started ticking, and that allowed the plaintiffs to be successful. So the state's definition of similar students to whom other students are compared to was indeterminate, and so again that meant that the clock of statute of limitations could not start ticking. So they found that the plaintiff's claims fell within the 4-month statute of limitations upon which the state was riding in order to dismiss. And so this one actually gets to move forward. In New York, it is still pending. So looking ahead as a school leader, I think that with teacher recourse and legal issues, that the biggest factor is being transparent. I did not have any resources, that I knew about teacher recourse or any of the legal issues in CCSD or in Colorado. I actually had to email someone from the Colorado Department of Education to get some information on this because at my school, it is not transparent at all. And so the picture I have here is actually from a slideshow that I was presented, as all teachers were, at the beginning of this school year and the last 3 or 4 school years, talking about the process of our evaluation system at our school. And so, it starts with this annual orientation, our self-assessment, a meeting with our evaluator, observations in here, a mid-year review, their final assessment, end-of-year review, the ratings, and then goal settings and performance planning for next year. Nowhere in there or in our meetings does it talk about what happens if you aren't satisfied with your rating, what resources does a teacher have. And, that's why I had to email that person. So I, as a school leader, would try to be more transparent, work with the Board of Education and teacher associations to interpret state requirements, applying them, but also fairly and fully, okay, of course. And then during those meetings with teachers in the early weeks, I think, again, as far as being transparent, I would hold those meetings with teachers and evaluators and other staff to comprehensively cover what the entire process looks like, why, and why Colorado has chosen to interpret our evaluation process as such, and what options teachers have in a variety of reasons, for a variety of outcomes and reasons, including where to consult. further resources. So that would be how I would maybe change up what my school does and in my district. Thank you.